Hey, badass black girls, and they making big moves. Hey, badass black girls, nothing that you can't do. They are the future, I'm trying to tell ya. They want the best, no time to settle. They got the strength to handle the pressure. These are the queens, nobody better. Yeah, changing the narrative, that is imperative. They about to rock this. Tell the women that you got this. Got no time for people who are toxic. It's all love, good vibes. You know I got your back, girl. Talking issues that matter. This is badass black girl, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Badass Black Girl. I'm MJ, and with us today we have the wonderful Jina Etienne. She's a wonderful writer, she's a social worker, and there are so many other things that we will be discussing today about her journey, about her expertise. Let me allow Gina to introduce herself, and then we'll have a very fascinating conversation about what she does for a living. Hi, Gina.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be tribute on your vlog.
So, Gina, how would you introduce yourself to those who don't know you?
Well, for those who don't know me, I'm a social worker by trade. I've been in the field for almost about 3 years. I work with the geriatric population. I've done things that are relative to the experiences that I have as a writer, on my experience as a social worker. I've implemented programs, I created programs for the elderly clients that I serve. One of those programs that I created is called Friends of Haiti, and it's relative, to my background of giving back to my community. So I have Haitian clients that I work with, and to create this program was to provide an environment where they can socialize with other Haitian people within the community that they live in. And then I also have a workshop that I created that was launched during the quarantine that I'm excited about. It's called In Your Own Words, um, and it's something that I'm proud of, um, to be able to contribute to my job. And in connection with that, I'm an author of 2 books. So the first book that I wrote is called The Bougie Social Work Girl, and it's pretty much about my experience with going into the social work field, where I talk about some of the things that I do as a social worker. And then the other book that I wrote, which is called Haitian Girls Brunch. That's pretty much about my experiences as a Haitian girl, completely different from the first book that I wrote. The first book I wrote, I'm talking about my social work journey. So the second book I wrote, I'm talking about my experiences as a Haitian girl, which, most girls can relate to. I feel like the experiences are so universal, especially with it's really synonymous to the Black girl experience, I find, with, the idea of being domestic and being adultified, and the whole, sexualization of Black girls. So that's pretty much what I put into my writing, you know, when it comes to empowering and uplifting, Haitian girls.
So, let's talk a little bit about your work as a social worker. A lot of members in our audience, they're young and trying to decide which way to go in terms of having a career,
Hmm.
and of course, I'm sure that we're social. In order to be proficient in social work, there are certain qualities that a person needs. You need to be patient. You need to see it. It's a vocational type of work where you really need to have a passion for service and for just being available to other people. So my question is, what led you to social work? And since you mentioned a lot of your clients being Haitian, and I know that you yourself you have Haitian ties, Would you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about the needs that are specific to this population, to the Haitian population that you serve?
Well, what led me into the profession of being a social worker, interestingly, was, my need to wanting to work with um, young girls. Um, and I eventually want to, work in a high school level where, I can work with girls who look like me, girls who can identify with me. That's something that, was a passion for me. I've even have groups of, young girls that I work with in the community. So I do this voluntarily. Um, but the need of working as a geriatric social worker now is, through my job search, and me being Haitian, as I was looking for an opportunity, I saw that they were looking for a geriatric social worker. And I started out in the field working with dementia clients. And I'm like, I have, that experience already. And they're looking for someone who is um, bilingual in Haitian Creole. And that was an area that I'm strong in. I speak Creole well, so I felt, it would be a perfect opportunity for me to be able to help my people as a, Haitian girl.
And do you find that there are certain challenges that are typical to working with people from Haiti? Um, what are some of the needs that you have identified that what are they struggling with the most?
It's really interesting that you asked that question. I feel like it's really the language barrier and not being able to access certain resources. I kind of mentioned that in my book when it comes to, you know, and not even the Haitian girl. I feel like it's just the descendants of Haitians in general. We're always told we need to go in certain career fields, we need to pursue a career in the healthcare field. But it's like I'm seeing that there's a lot of need when it comes to not understanding how to fill out a paperwork, not understanding the benefits of certain things that they're entitled to. Um, a lot of needing to do, paperwork, assistance with applying for like entitlement services. And I have friends who, when they communicate to me, they're like, these are the things that they're doing at home. And in my book, I talk about, having kids, be exposed to different areas and not just focusing on the healthcare field. Because in my field, I was told not to go into it. But here there's a need for it in our community. So without, my position as a bilingual social worker, if I would have went to a career path elsewhere, they wouldn't be able to be exposed to someone who has the experiences, someone who knows, the background, and what it means to be Haitian.
This is so true. And this reminds me of a conversation that I was having the other day with Gabrielle Borlache, who's also from Haiti. And
Hmm.
she's a actress and producer and director. And she was talking about the importance of making sure that you listen to your heart, because Haitian society often tries to dictate the kind of career that we should have. And I laughed because I know what those careers are. They usually want you to become a lawyer or an architect or
Right.
a doctor. And there are other fields where we are needed. The arts for sure, but when you take a profession like being a social worker, if you're not doing it, then it's not gonna get done because you have specific skills that are needed in the profession, your language skills, and of course everything else that comes with understanding the culture, being able to communicate beyond just the language, but understanding where the people come from, their
Mhm.
personal stories and their culture. So I want to, I mean, kudos to you for
Thank you.
taking on that role and working with this population. You wrote an entire book about your experience, The Bougie Social Work Girl, which is available on Amazon. People can get it paperback or Kindle. I know that a lot of young people enjoy reading books on their tablets, on their phone. So here's your opportunity to read this book in through different formats. You also have a second book that you mentioned earlier, Haitian Girls Brunch, and the subtitle is Navigating the Cultural Experiences of the Haitian Girl Through Brunch and Dialogue. I love this title because I know how intense brunch can get.
Mhm.
When you get a few Haitian girls together for brunch, um, the conversation is really really interesting, gets deep and a lot of laughter. um People get angry sometimes. uh,
Mhm.
it's very very vivid. So let's talk a little bit about this book, um in which you talk about, of course, your background as a Haitian woman, what it means to you to be a Haitian girl. So, when did you decide that you were going to write this book?
It's interesting you asked that. I think it has to do with um, having a toxic relationship with my mother. I love her dearly, but it wasn't until, this stuff was coming up in therapy and some of the stuff that I was telling my therapist, um, which is like when you tell someone something about a certain situation, it it sounds normal to you, and when somebody else hears it, they're like, whoa, this is, the type of treatment that you have is almost to the point where, why are you talking about, my mother that way or whatever and stuff. So when I was telling, my therapist about, some of the challenges that I have with the relationship with my mother, and she was like saying, it doesn't seem like you were given, the foundation to be confident. It doesn't seem like there was love there. And it's like hearing those words is like, ouch, like, really? Like now it's kind of like my mom is sounding as if she's a bad person, and she's really not a bad person. It's just the pressure and the expectation, and probably not having, you know, the kind of upbringing that I have. So it's, wanting the best, wanting, the Haitian girls to supersede, certain cultural expectations. So that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book. And the other reason had to do with the expectations of the roles of, Haitian women and relationships. So those are the two reasons that, propelled me to want to write about the, Haitian experience. And I feel like it stems from our upbringing of having to be told, you know, this is what you need to get a man. And it's like they're adultifying us at a young age. But when it comes time for us to date, we don't have, certain confidence. We're not, what is the word I'm looking for? It's like we didn't have that foundation
Like, you're not
to be
equipped.
able to date properly, to wait for a man to, court us in the right way. to
Mm-hmm.
the point that when we are in relationships, we're the one who's kind of like pursuing the man. And we're like, wait a minute, I have, everything that I was taught from my upbringing. This is what I was taught. I was taught, if I learn how to cook, if I do this, I'm going to have the man. And it's like, I kind of wrote, this shouldn't be the message, that girls are being told at the early age. They need to be taught, that they're a prize. They need to be taught basically to just wait for the right person to pursue them, that they don't need to do things so that a man can court them. So
This is
that was my message.
this is so true, and I love that you bring it up. I was having a conversation with Dr. Gerda Nicola. She's a
Mhm.
therapist in South Florida, and we were talking. She has a group that she hosts every a room that she hosts every week on Clubhouse, and the topic that week was relationships for
Mhm.
Black girls, and we were talking about the role that culture plays in the way we interact with other people. And I brought up the fact that um, relationships with Haitian parents are so complicated because I don't remember ever hearing my parents say "I love you," for instance, until
Mhm.
maybe I was already an adult. I guess things were changing and they were more open about their feelings. But as a kid, I never heard it because it's not really something that Haitian parents do. That's one thing. The second thing is that they tend to make everything very official. Like
Mhm.
if you have a friend, they need to know who the parents are, and there
Mhm.
is no hanging out with someone to see if you want to be friends. It's like, oh, you're friends with so and so, and it's like official. It's a friend. Same thing with dating.
Mhm.
They make such a big deal out of dating that there is no such thing as going on a date to explore the relationship to see if it's actually going to work. There's a lot of expectations put on the couple as soon as they decide that they're going to go out for a drink. And they don't prepare the kids. Haitian parents don't prepare girls for that type of experience either. How do you date? We don't really have a conversation about what is acceptable on a first date, what is not acceptable. And of course, I'm not just talking about the sexual aspect of things,
Mhm.
because parents, Haitian parents for sure, will warn you about sex your entire life. But what 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 kind of conversation do you have on a first date? How open are you supposed to be? And what else do you need to do other than like you said, being a good
Learn how
cook,
to cook.
being a good future wife? we
Mhm.
we're not we're not um, taught those things. And at first I thought maybe it was just in my family, but talking to other Haitian girls, other Haitian women, I realized that it's a cultural thing where we're just not equipped to properly enter some relationships. And I think that you writing about your experience in Haitian girls brunch is important because you're opening the door for us to have this conversation. And if we can have it with our parents, then we're going to have it with our friends and we'll have it with our own children. And I want to thank you for this book because you approach many topics that Haitian girls and Haitian women are dying to talk about, but they're not always given the opportunity to do so.
I definitely, appreciate, you giving me this opportunity to talk about the book. And I do explore a lot of topics that are challenging, topics that I've had with my mother, especially about when it comes to shacking up, going to the club. And when I would have these conversations, especially about wanting to go to the club. And I remember going to the club one time and I put this in a book and I came home and it was late and my mom was like, where were you? And I was like, I went to a bal. And she was like, utan bal? And then she was like, she basically told me, promiscuous women go to bars. And I'm like, what are you trying to imply? Like, I'm really inclined with, Haitian music. I love Haitian music. I love to dance. So it's like when I heard her say that to me, we immediately got into an argument. I was trying to persuade her, that that's not what I am. So, and it's like a lot of girls relate to that experience. I've had young girls that I work with who are Haitian. They brought this conversation up to my attention, and it's kind of like they were looking for me to give them directions. And at that time, I couldn't help them because it's like I'm not their parents. I can't decide how they should approach that situation.
Right.
Um, so I just basically listened, and I'm not sure what year we had that conversation. I never knew that I would, write a book and to communicate how they should, navigate these experiences and ways to uplift them and encourage them, share with them, Haitian women who look like them, who identify with them. And, especially, having that book list that I created with, many authors who are Haitian, it gives them the outlet to find and learn about other Haitian women's experiences too, as well.
You definitely approach some topics of importance. You talk about trauma, particularly generational trauma. You talk about mental health, and um I mean, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, not just because of my experience with my own parents, but being around Haitian parents in general.
Mm-hmm,
There is a certain roughness in the way they express their concern. Like name calling is very common,
mm-hmm,
where if you do this, it means you're this,
mm-hmm,
without the nuance. So I can totally see, I can picture the scene in my head where you're talking about going dancing and automatically being assigned a label because you went,
mm-hmm,
because a lot of Haitian households are very strict, and um, you're either this or you're not. And parents are not always careful about the way they talk to the children about themselves, and the images that they're creating in those young minds. And sometimes you don't realize it. You feel that you're strong as a Haitian girl. You feel that you're strong, and you persuade yourself that you're not taking in the messages that they're sending your way. Those labels are not sticking, until you realize at some point that you did internalize some of those things, and they do follow you into adulthood, and
and
the
relationship.
way, yeah,
Yeah.
into the way you see yourself and the way you interact with others. So, important conversations to be had for sure. Are you working on anything else? And I know that you just published this book, Haitian Girls Brunch, but I also know that you write a lot. It's your second book. So,
Mm-hmm.
what are you working on right now? Or are you working on something else right now?
Interestingly, a lot of the books that I am working on, I was able to write them in the Haitian Girls Brunch. So if I had a topic that I talked about in a book that pertains to self-care, if I have a book that's connected to that, I basically communicated that in my writing. So I have a lot of other books that are in the works. I have a another book that I'm working on that I would like to put out um, in the next couple of months, titled Haitian, not Haitian Girls Brunch, a brunch for Black girls. So this will be similar to the Haitian Girls Brunch, where I would be talking about the Black girl experience. And I was working on it earlier, and the experiences are somewhat parallel. And even with the conversations I have with women on Clubhouse, because one of the things that I communicate is, and I wrote that in the Haitian Girls Brunch book. I um I talked about not being able to identify with the Black girl experience as a Haitian girl, because I grew up in a Haitian household and I don't really experience what it means to be a Black girl until I exit my home and I'm faced with society's, expectations or this perceptions of what it means to be a Black girl. So I'm really excited about this project and I feel like it would be very impactful to a lot of Black girls, Haitian girls, that any girl that identifies with being Black.
This is wonderful. And I love that you brought up Clubhouse, because I think that it's a platform that allows Black girls and Black women to gather and have the kind of conversations that you're encouraging in your book. And the fact that you're there and that you're encouraging those conversations on the platform is wonderful. I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us today, to tell us about your career in social work, about the books that you've written, not just about that part of your life, being a social
Mhm.
worker in service of the elderly within your community, but also thinking about how you can help younger girls and um, be a role model for them as they navigate being Haitian, being Black um, in 2021. This is a very needed book. I want to remind the audience that the name of the book is Haitian Girls Brunch, Navigating the Cultural Experiences of the Haitian Girl Through Brunch and Dialogue. And in this book, Gina talks about many topics of importance, difficult conversations to be had, because sometimes the very life of um, a Black girl depends on it, because there is so much depression and discouragement that can
Mhm.
come with not understanding our culture, not understanding the beauty and the power that ultimately we can find in being a Black girl these days. So, thank you again, Gina, for coming. I hope you'll come to visit us again. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.